cloud and that it is going, and it is. So I'm going to turn it over to the judges, and good luck.
Thank you, Dr. Cosgrove. Hi, I'm Karen Milton. Good afternoon from New York, which is where I'm sitting. And I'm a lawyer by training. I've spent most of my career, pretty much all of it, in public service. My current job is as Chief of Staff to the Inspector General for the Metropolitan Transportation Authority. That's the New York State agency that oversees New York City subways, buses, bridges, tunnels, and the commuter rails in the greater metropolitan area. Prior to that, I worked for the federal judiciary as the circuit executive for this in the Second Circuit, which are the states of New York, Vermont, and Connecticut. The circuit executive is actually the chief operating officer, but believe it or not, we dealt a lot with habeas corpus. So I am looking forward to today's conversation. I'm now going to turn it over to my fellow judges to introduce themselves, and then we'll come back to the three of you and ask you to introduce yourself along with your mentors and your coaches and your teacher, or who is ever here as your support system. So I'll turn it over to Charlie.
Good afternoon. My name is Charlie Henderlighter. I'm the Director of Government Affairs at St. Louis Realtors in St. Louis, Missouri. I'm a former political science professor, and many years ago, I was a student in the We the People program on the other side of, well, I guess it's a proverbial table in this instance. I'm looking forward to our conversation today. Thanks.
Good morning, afternoon. My name is Mark Simons. I'm a practicing attorney and coach and judge for the past 12 years. Really excited that you're here on day 2 of the Nationals. Looking forward to take a deep breath, have fun, and look forward to talking with you. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Kayla McGarry.
I'm Tamara Singleton.
And I'm Katie Brackman, and we're representing Unit 1 from Mr. Phillips' AP Government and Politics class at Robert C. Byrd High School, and our teacher present today is Jamie Looker.
Great, thank you. Well, welcome to everyone, and we're ready to begin. If you're ready to begin, we're here, Unit 1, Question 2. Let me read the question to you. Parliament passed the Habeas Corpus Act of 1679. What is habeas corpus? And to what extent, if any, is it essential to the principle of limited government? How has the writ of habeas corpus evolved in these United States? And under what circumstances, if any, might the writ of habeas corpus place an unreasonable burden on the government? Please begin.
Thomas Jefferson once said, "The habeas corpus secures every man here, alien or citizen, against everything which is not law, whatever shape it may assume." Habeas corpus is a writ, or a court order, that requires the government to justify why an individual is being held in custody and to set that individual free if a reason cannot be provided. The writ of habeas corpus was adapted from English common law and is critical in limiting the national government and protecting individual rights. Thus, the privilege to invoke the writ of habeas corpus was implanted in Article 1, Section 8 of the United States Constitution and granted to every person on American soil, as Jefferson pledged. The writ of habeas corpus prohibits all government officials, even those highest in the land, from holding a person in custody without proper reason or explanation. Because it places such a crucial limitation on government power, it has only been suspended a handful of times in our nation's history. President Lincoln suspended habeas corpus in 1861 to silence secessionists in Maryland. In modern day America, President Bush suspended habeas corpus to those determined by the US to be a, quote, enemy combatant. Habeas corpus is one of the greatest means through which the civil liberties of American citizens, such as freedom of thought, expression, and speech, are protected. Thus, both presidents were met with sharp opposition when they revoked the writ of habeas corpus to certain persons, despite their usage of it to protect Americans from what they deemed to be a clear and present danger during times of war. The writ of habeas corpus has long been widely regarded as one of the greatest assurances of individual freedoms in the United States Constitution, and should continue to be observed as such for many years to come, especially given the ever-expanding jurisdiction of the federal government.
It is crucial to remember that the writ of habeas corpus is a method used that is brought up in court to restrict the federal government and protects the accused's fundamental rights. The evolution of the writ of habeas corpus in America can be seen from passing the act in 1679 to the accommodation of it in the Constitution called the Suspension Clause in Article 1, Section 9 of Paragraph 2. The privilege shall not be suspended unless when in case of rebellion or invasion, the public safety may require it. Now, in today's time, the use of the writ has been varied with multiple and broad interpretations from the Supreme Court that is slowly reducing the use of it. If it continues on this path, there will be no protection against unlawful imprisonment, and this can be seen in cities such as Hong Kong today, where protests broke out fighting against a new amendment bill that would reform democracy and compromise their legal independence. Issues have risen with the writ of habeas corpus during Bush's presidency with the passing of the Military Commission Act, which Section 6 of the act declared unconstitutional because it stripped the non-citizens a habeas rights. Cases such as Boumediene versus Bush passed with 5-justice majority stating that the Military Commission Act was unconstitutional to the detainees. As a writ evolves, it has and will always be tested in our society to be deemed as an essential right, just like all the others.
The writ of habeas corpus places the burden of proof on the government. If a person reports an unlawful detention or imprisonment to a court and requests the court investigate to determine whether the decision is lawful, the government must be able to provide substantial evidence that the detention was reasonable. This raises the burden on the U.S. government to make sure they have just reasoning before arresting or continuing to detain a person. Usually, the burden of proof falls on the petitioner. Government should make sure to keep their fact findings on the petitioner to make sure that if upon request they can prove they had solid reasoning. It also burdens the government with the decision of when to suspend habeas corpus, which has only happened 4 times. It also provides the decision on who use habeas corpus. In the Judiciary Act of 1789, Congress granted the federal court authority to issue habeas corpus to prisoners in federal custody or committed for trial before a federal court. In 1807, the Supreme Court noted that federal courts could not issue habeas corpus to prisoners held by state or local governments because Congress had not provided such authority. The court also held in 1822 and again in 1830 that federal courts lacking appellate jurisdiction over criminal cases could issue the writ only before prisoners' conviction.
All right, thank you for your prepared statement. Let's dig into this topic a little bit more. How does habeas corpus fit with the guarantee of due process in the 5th and 14th Amendments?
So habeas corpus ensures that people that are arrested by the government have the right to know why they were arrested. And this prevents the government from going in and taking people off the streets or out of their homes for something that they may not deserve, and from taking them into custody without them knowing why. So it is protecting their individual freedom and their individual liberty.
Thank you, Katie. I'm going to go off your idea. It's the right of the habeas corpus that makes the thought of being illegally imprisoned in a democratic system like the United States such far-fetched. It's the habeas corpus is this the prisoners one way to question the legal aspect of their imprisonment. So that really helps out.
Okay, I'm going to take it a different way. What about this, when the suspension occurs, what other protections come into play in the Constitution for those who are incarcerated?
I apologize. Can you repeat your question?
Yes, when a suspension of the habeas corpus occurs, where what other protections, if somebody's arrested and incarcerated or held, come into play? What other constitutional protections are there in the event of that situation occurring? For example, I'll give you the 14th Amendment, or what other provisions that can you think of or reasons come into play?
I mean, the amendment against cruel and unusual punishment, I feel like that fits best too. Katie, you were going to say something. I apologize.
No, you're fine. I was going to say that. I was also going to add they cannot have excessive bail. And again, due process.
So let's, you spoke about President Lincoln suspending habeas corpus in 1861 at the outset of the Civil War. Are there any circumstances in today's political environment that the executive, the president, would be justified in suspending habeas corpus?
To justify suspending habeas corpus, the conditions has to be like very threatening to the country, so like high threats. So in today's world, with all of the protests and stuff, like for example, the Black Lives Matter riot, it wasn't suspended even though there was a big threat. Um, they didn't suspend it. Like they went and broke up the riots not very well. But it would be pretty hard to justify it because everybody just takes stuff really personally. So when they would unjustify it, it would be like immediately questioned, like how they did it and why they did it. It wouldn't pass so easily like how it did with Lincoln and George. Even though they were questioned, they still passed it without when Bush got questioned. But Lincoln was questioned, but he had just reasoning for it. Sorry, that didn't really make sense.
Going off of what Kayla said, I think another current example would be the Capitol protests or the Capitol riots on January 6th. In that case, there was a very evident, clear and present danger that was presented on the media. And I think that that case specifically could be considered more justified in enacting or in suspending habeas corpus.
All right, so you've talked about Lincoln's suspension during the Civil War. I want you to talk to me a little bit about that. Evaluate President Lincoln's suspension of habeas corpus during the Civil War. Do you think that was appropriate? Do you think it was legal? Do you think it was smart? Give me your feedback on that.
I think the situation that Lincoln faced was much more dire than like for what we saw on January 6th, for example, because he was facing a nation that was literally separating. And I think that if he had to enact habeas corpus in order to keep the nation together as a whole and for the common good of the entire republic, then I personally believe that that was justified.
I'm gonna go off what Katie said. I believe that since he had a justification of his certain aspects, then yes. But I feel like there's just limitations towards the habeas corpus that can be used as a con of it, if that makes sense.
Yes, I agree with what Tamara is saying. I think the habeas corpus is viewed by the public as like one of their greatest protections of like their First Amendment rights, their freedom of speech, their freedom to have an opinion and speak out against the government. So I can understand why Lincoln and Bush were met with such opposition from the public.
Even though the reason was definitely justified, they faced severe backlash for like months for that.
What do you think are the impacts that happen or occur on state governments as a result of the imposition of habeas corpus under the Constitution?
I think it puts the state government under a lot of stress because in order to issue it, there has to be a big event going on. So adding on that with the suspension of it, it also brings forth like the problems of when you're arresting other people, where you're keeping them and what's happening to them. And then when they go through and start like appealing it, they have to deal with all of that. And it just adds more and more to it. If that makes sense. Yeah.
I feel like individual states would be inclined to view that as an infringement of their rights as states when the federal government is the one coming in and suspending the writ of habeas corpus.
There we go. So let's talk a little bit about we talked about the Constitution. How do you see that the writ of habeas corpus in today's sort of COVID environment? Do you think that that there's a role for habeas corpus or the suspension of habeas corpus in today's pandemics? I mean, everything's on Zoom, we're all virtual. How does that affect the rights, particularly of criminal defendants at this time?
I can understand during COVID, we've seen a lot of conversation around individual liberties, such as like, oh, well, I don't want to wear a mask because it's against my rights. And I think that a habeas corpus could come into play when you're thinking about like that ideology of people worrying about their individual rights being infringed upon, and what could happen if the government comes in and issues an order that would encompass all of the people.
I feel like the habeas corpus.
Okay, time. All right, good job. Yay. Okay, so now we're going to do some feedback.
Panelists, thank you so much for that conversation today. I wish we had more time, but you guys really were able to cover a lot of ground in just 8 minutes, so I really appreciated that. In your presentation, I really like that you guys mentioned the Judiciary Act of 1789. That was the first time we'd heard that today, and I thought you did a nice job of doing that, starting with that and then going through some Supreme Court precedent in terms of the early evolution of habeas corpus in the American system. I thought that was a particularly good portion of your prepared statement. I think you guys nailed this idea in that first follow-up question that habeas corpus is critical to this idea that you can't have unjust detention in a democracy. I think that comment really struck at the heart of everything that we're discussing today. So I really appreciated that conversation. Thank you much.
Well, I greatly appreciate the historical context and how you were able to understand the foundational basis of why is this even relevant to our society and daily activities. I loved how you talked about the Supreme Court has been reducing, it appears to be reducing some of those protections, but then you also threw out, hey, we got to be careful because look at Hong Kong. If you're not careful, that's where we could end up. So I loved how you had the historical aspect and then you were able to tie it into the current events. That's really important and that's what we look for. So thank you very much.
Yes, very nice job. It was a great conversation. And I thought you're tying it into the idea of mask wearing and the infringement of individual rights, possibly habeas corpus could have a role. I think that that was a really good tie-in, but again, great historical context. You walked us through the beginnings of habeas corpus and, starting with the quote from Jefferson and how it's important to our system of government. So thank you very much. It was a great conversation. You did really well. Deep breaths, everybody, and congratulations. Thanks so much. And good job to your teachers for the preparation they did in getting you here today.
All right, excellent job. I'm going to turn our recording off.